Okay, so moving on to our third news story of the month, and this is really based around a headline, and this is where I think the theme that I identified at the beginning of this watching brief starts to sort of show is that this month I'm particularly interested in, as ever, I think the priorities of the story, as it were, the priorities of how people think archaeology is made exciting. And I think the next two news articles in particular really tackle this. So this headline caught my attention. It is Archaeologists find Holy Grail of Shipwrecks carrying stash worth up to $17 billion. Now, I don't know about you, but I take issue with the notion that the Holy Grail of Shipwrecks is something that contains a lot of intrinsically valuable material. Arguably, for example, I would say that actually the Antikythera shipwreck would be a Holy Grail. What's your take on this?
As you see, well, I despair
Yeah,
over.
sorry, or a Bronze Age canoe. You know, that's
Yeah,
the Holy Grail. Yeah.
yeah. I despair over articles. I understand why they come about, but I despair over headlines like that. It's the laziest kind of cultural journalism, but it's clickbait.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's what it's all about these days. I mean, yeah, people, and again, regular viewers of Watching Brief will know that I've got a particular interest in maritime archaeology, and I've also looked at a lot of issues around illicit salvage and the treasure hunting masquerading as archaeology, and the exploits of a certain Florida-based company whose name shall not be spoken, like Hesa, whose name shall not be spoken.
Well, actually, I was amazed that the Voldemort of shipwreck hunters wasn't involved in this. I really
Well, we
was.
don't know that they're not in
Okay.
some way or another. But anyway, that's part of the problem here. This is all very secretive and
Okay.
stuff. No, actually, to be fair, no, I'm not normally fair to Odyssey, but the commercial company in this appears to be a separate entity entirely. The main commercial entity involved in looking for what is actually a Spanish galleon called the San Jose is a company called Sea Search Armada, and basically this is the story of a Spanish 64-gun, three-masted ship of the line called the San Jose, which was launched in 1698. And in 1708, it was involved in a sea battle with the Royal Navy off the coast of what's now the country of Colombia.
I just like to say that in the Live Science article here, they say the San Jose was equipped with 62 guns, but that was no match against the British. It's all. You can just feel the sort of someone just itching to write a script. But anyway, go on.
Yeah. I mean, this is during the War of Spanish Succession in the early 18th century.
Yeah.
There was a sea battle off the port of Cartagena in what's now Colombia, then part of the Spanish Overseas Empire of the Indies. At the time, the San Jose was carrying a cargo of precious metal and precious stones. Obviously, one of the principal reasons that Spain was interested in that overseas empire in Central and South America was the minerals and precious stones and precious metals that were mined there. Basically, in the course of this battle with the Royal Navy, the San Jose blew up and sank. So there is an estimate that in 2012, that one estimate of the value of the cargo, the commercial value of the cargo at modern prices, was that it would be worth something like £700 million, almost $1 billion. Now, inevitably, these things are really speculative. because a lot of it, for example, when Odyssey lifted a cargo from another Spanish ship that blew up in action with the Royal Navy, the Mercedes, Nuestra Señora de las Mercedes. They lifted 17 tons of what were mostly concreted silver coins,
Right.
and they claimed huge value, again around about 500 million in commercial value. When the Spanish got the coins back from Odyssey, their analysis was that most of the coins were actually worth no more than the resale value of smelted silver, because they didn't have the added market value of being a coin because they were in such poor condition.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's a lot of imponderables in these things.
Well, and for example, the number quoted as I hinted at in the headline, in the article here, this figure in the headline is $17 billion, which is a lot. I mean, that's you could pay for a government department with that. So
that's the point, Mark. In a lot of these stories, when it involves treasure galleons, it's think of a number, double it, add a naught on the end, and then ask for the investment in the excavation.
Yeah,
that's how it works.
Yeah, get people excited with the presentation. But the thing is that the estimate here ranges from 17 billion. That's the one that's in the headline, down to 4 billion, which is a huge variance, a huge margin of error.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay. And there was an analysis done on for example, the museum exhibits in Florida that came from the treasure galleons that have been salvaged off Florida. And according to one estimate, by the time they'd built the museums, done the put the security in place, supported the ongoing conservation and opening of these things and so on, the cost of storing and exhibiting these items actually exceeded their commercial value anyway. So basically it's not nearly as clear cut as these articles like to suggest. The thing about the San Jose, she's been at the center of an ongoing legal controversy involving the government of Colombia, Sea Search Armada, the Spanish government, and now UNESCO are involved. And the reason it's in the news at the moment is that UNESCO in Paris, the United Nations body that we talked about earlier in connection with Stonehenge, that looks at the ethics and conservation of world heritage in a political context, largely, really. They have issued an open letter to the government of Colombia saying, it would be unethical and unacceptable to allow the commercial exploitation of this ship, and offering support if the government of Colombia chooses to go down a non-commercial route to excavate the wreck.
Yeah, I believe that.
And in fact, just to finish, the most recent findings about the San Jose have been the result of a survey that was conducted by the Colombian Navy. It's obviously a government body, not a commercial body, not Sea Search Armada or any of the others that have tried to stake a claim. Using equipment and staff from the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute in the States, which obviously people they're most famous for. It was Woods Hole and Bob Ballard's team from Woods Hole that found the Titanic, and certainly in all of their previous operations, I think most people say they've behaved completely ethically. They've not worked towards the commercial exploitation of sensitive shipwrecks. So we're dealing with a very complicated issue here, which has been again reduced to a headline of billions of dollars. And in fact, the one of the controversies at the moment is that Sea Search Armada claim rights on the wreck, and they claim that they spotted it as an anomaly a number of years ago now, but opponents of their stance say that actually the actual wreck of the San Jose as discovered by the Colombian Navy is in a different place, so therefore go away.
Right, I see. So I'll come to that in just a second. Just hold that thought.
Mm.
I just wanted just to say that so the UNESCO in their comments and statements they've said that monetizing the site quote would cause irretrievable loss of significant heritage, and they go on to say that the San Jose wreck represents cultural heritage, and allowing commercial exploitation of Colombia's cultural heritage goes against the best scientific standards and international ethical principles as laid down especially in the UNESCO Underwater Cultural Heritage Convention. So that's the statement. But is there a potential here, bearing in mind you were holding that thought for me, a potential here that that the government is trying to claim a state asset basically, and whether that's a cultural asset or a monetary asset, having the military basically tell this private company back off in some capacity is essentially in the same way that frankly I think Britain would do this if something similar was found in the North Sea and there was a link to the UK. They're first and foremost trying to make sure that they have options on this and that they're not going to get pushed out of it.
It's a complicated one because obviously for a relatively poor country in that region, this even a few $100 million will be a useful windfall, albeit very short-lived. And the argument will be actually, but if you salvage this vessel, recover this vessel archaeologically and ethically, and then build a museum in Cartagena and put it on, put the finds on display, and so the ongoing tourist value is far higher than if you just do a one-off fire sale. But on the other hand, there are precedents.
But that's not necessarily though. What my point being though is that the Colombians want to have the options. They don't. For example, I mean, I'm looking at the Sea Search Armada Facebook page. Sea Search Armada SSA is a US entity owned 50% or more by US citizens. In this instance, this is a. Well, actually, it comes down to one of the key questions in archaeology, and that is who owns the past in great big letters, and especially in the sea. This is one of those areas where these sorts of questions get really played out with big bombastic gestures because of the cost of recovery, I suppose.
Absolutely, because it costs exponentially more to do archaeology underwater than it does on land. It's more difficult. It's more dangerous. The conservation issues are even more complex often. But it also goes to the root of archaeology. A lot of archaeology on land is covered by legal precedents that go back sometimes more than 100 years. The first antiquities laws in Egypt date back to I think the 1840s, around the 1840s. At sea, the legal situation is far more complex. For example, it depends on whether there's a difference between territorial waters, exclusive economic zone, and the high seas. There's a difference between whether a country is a signatory to the UNESCO Convention on the Protection of Underwater Cultural Heritage, for example, like France or like Spain, or whether it just follows the rules of the Annex, which set out technical rules for doing underwater archaeology, which is the position that Britain has at the moment. And also Colombia isn't a signatory either.
No.
So that complicates the matter here anyway, with the UNESCO getting involved. What UNESCO is trying to do is extend, put its arms out to Colombia and say, come in with this big international club, and we will help you do this properly. The Colombians actually have a very stark choice, because they either run with the UNESCO approach, which is to work broadly with the archaeological mainstream internationally and treat it as non-exploitable cultural heritage, or they go with the commercial American model, which is that it's heritage, but actually it's an investment and this stuff's worth money.
Yeah, what's interesting is that, I mean, obviously, yes, that's a stark choice in terms of methodology, but also more, I think, more uh, to the man on the street, as it were. It's a
Mm.
choice in terms of how and when a return is made on this archaeology. So,
Mm.
so the UNESCO
Whether a
route.
return should even be made on the archaeology, and what form that return should take.
Well, no, because you say that, but I mean, even a museum would lead to a return.
Oh yeah, and it
If you
might
see
be a
what I
return
mean.
in kind, or as well as a return in.
That's exactly my point. And
Yeah.
so actually the relationship between whether or not you basically hoover it up and sell it off as a resource, or whether you exploit it in a slower, more methodical fashion, which part of which, the quality of the information will be a key part of its cultural
Yeah.
value. So therefore the methodology has to be careful archaeological excavation and examination of the site.
Mm.
Uh, what the trade is, the stark contrast is not between have and have not. The contrast is between how you have, and ultimately, therefore, where that money goes to and how quickly. And so I mean, the headline grabbed my attention because I think it's a headline written. I mean, actually, by a psychology and English literature grad writing for Live Science, with, I think, a click mentality. Oh, this is a big number. How exciting! And
Yeah.
it is exciting. I'm not trying to say it's not, but it's interesting how ultimately, again, it comes down to this question of who owns it, and as you say, there are good answers to that, simple answers to that when it comes to the law. If it's in territorial waters, things become, the pathway becomes much clearer. Uh, but well, actually, this relates to what we're going to talk about next. Actually, so shall we sort of park it here and move on to
I'd just like
Pompeii?
to make one point before we leave this topic entirely, and it's a very
Uh-huh.
quick one. And I don't want to leave our audience with the impression that I think that the American ethos is to exploit archaeology commercially, because it absolutely isn't. The American Association, Archaeological Association of America, and other groups are steadfast in defending the ethics of non-commercial, non-exploitative archaeology. And in fact, when it comes to military vessels, if the San Jose had been an American warship, she'd be protected under the Sunken Military Craft Act, and the American government would prevent. Would maintain all its rights to control access and prevent exploitation. So that strand of commercial exploitation that you get in companies like Odyssey, like Sea Search Armada, is not the American archaeologist's point of view. It's not the American government's point of view.
No, but arguably it is. There is a strand in the US of this use of the word relics. I really can't
Yeah.
stand how that word is used. In so much as relics becomes a word that is it's an asset that is owned by someone, and therefore someone has a right to make money off it. Often we see this
And
especially
we're
in
seeing it come into the titles of TV documentary series now.
exactly TV documentary series. But again, it comes down to the specifics of the decisions surrounding the handling of it, and
Yeah.
it's not all attempts to make money from, or indeed save something by making money from it, are bad.
No.
And I suppose that's a good point to sort of tick all those boxes there. But we'll just park this issue
You do
just for a
well.
second, and we'll move on to Pompeii. So,
Yeah.